Welcome back to How Would You Beat, where we discuss how you can use jobs to be done innovation methods to beat your competition. Remember to subscribe and like this podcast. In this episode, we will look at how you could beat corporate venturing. How can you achieve the innovation outcomes and the growth and equity value creation that companies need from corporate venturing programs, but faster, cheaper, and with far less risk? So today, corporate venturing is more important than ever. AI has compressed innovation cycles, and startups can move from idea to market faster than incumbents can respond. Microsoft, NVIDIA, Salesforce, Intel, Samsung are just some of the companies that are doing corporate venturing. And corporate venturing funding hit a $66 billion value in 2024, up 20% year over year. And AI startups, of course, are driving almost all of this. So what is corporate venturing? Why do companies need corporate venturing?
Well, corporate venturing is when you allocate capital to be invested in other companies that aren't your own, in startups typically, but it could be a growth company. And if we want to understand why companies do that and how you can outperform the traditional corporate venture model, we need to know what job CEOs are hiring corporate venture funds to do. What job is that, Jay?
It's a great question. Corporate venturing is a product, even though it's a financial product, but it is essentially a product to solve some sort of problem. And obviously, underneath the goal of corporate venturing is what CEOs are responsible. The ultimate job they're trying to get done is to create equity value for the company through different means, but in an age of incredibly fast technological change, the number one means to do that is technology innovation, is product innovation using new technologies ultimately to generate revenue and profitability growth. And so the problem is, of course, with incumbents in any market historically, this is true. The incumbents have people, processes, and technologies that are all designed around their old product. If you're Blockbuster, you're designed to rent video tapes through a physical store. You're not designed for streaming services. If you're a record company, you're designed to sell and distribute and inventory vinyl records. You're not designed for an iPod or MP3 players. And even if you're an iPod, you're not designed for streaming services. So it's incredibly hard for incumbent companies and teams and products and people and processes to capitalize on new opportunities. And this has been true, since the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah. So one of the products you can hire to capture equity value in a time of tremendous innovation is investing in R&D, as you're saying, Jay. But the current processes might hold you back from going as fast as you need to realize the opportunity. The other obvious one would be to acquire the high growth startups. Some entrepreneur already figured out what a good problem to go after is. They figured out a product. It's starting to get traction. And then instead of investing through a corporate venture fund in your own portfolio and in your own set of companies, you just go out and acquire what's already out there and you add that to the equity value of your corporation. Is that sufficient? Why not just say, let's rip out all the funds from corporate venturing and put more into M&A and buy the high growth startups so they become part of our equity value creation?
Yeah, that's a great question. And of course, it's not necessarily an either or. If you can make that acquisition in a market that is of interest and a growth market for the company should make an acquisition. Now, the problem with that, there's a few problems in the age of AI. And as everybody's seen, the AI valuations are exploding. So if you don't invest early, then you're going to be paying an incredibly high premium for that growth. And ultimately, it may pan out. It may be that you have to do that, and whatever price you have to pay is still a discount to the present value of the company. But if you're just buying really overvalued AI startups, you're at a huge disadvantage. You're essentially using your shareholders' capital to buy a company at an overvalued price that is not going to create equity value for your shareholders over time. Yeah. So and there may be opportunities like that. The problem, again, in the world of AI is things are moving so much faster. that AI companies can go from a zero to $1 billion of revenue faster than any companies ever before. I know that seems crazy because the internet was unbelievably fast to generate real revenue and profitability for companies, and AI just makes that look like a snail's pace. There's been measurements around it that it's literally 7 times faster than the internet. That is almost an order of magnitude faster. It's crazy. So what should a company do that wants to do corporate venturing? Well, the first thing is to identify the markets they want to be in. And this is where companies get into real trouble. They define their markets based on their product. This is Kodak defining the market as film. This is Britannica defining the market as encyclopedias. This is Blockbuster defining the market as video rentals. Those are not markets. The customer's job is the true market. It is independent of AI or the internet or blockchain or any technology. The customer is trying to achieve a goal that's independent of any solutions. That's the good news. That should be the starting point for all corporate venturing. So what markets do you want to be in for your customers? And this is where companies do have an advantage over startups. They have customers. Mm-hmm. They just have to realize that what they're doing for their customers is not selling them a product.
Right.
As the foundations of Job Street on Theory, what they're doing is they're helping customers get a job done using their product. Classic, like getting to a destination on time, right? You used to use paper maps, and then you used, GPS devices, and now we all use navigation apps on our phone. So right. The products change dramatically. The job of getting to a destination on time is exactly the same.
Right.
And that's true in every market. So that's an advantage for corporate venturing because you can assess the market first and then decide, is this something we want to be in? Because we have customers in this market. So there's an advantage to corporate venturing that is untapped. That in some cases there are examples of this, but where the corporate venturing program develops the product with new people, processes, and technology, but then it also benefits the company's existing customers, and that's where a commercial relationship between a startup and a corporation, a larger corporation, can really be an advantage, and then lead to that M&A you mentioned, Jared, which is, okay, now it makes sense. All the ducks in a row, it really makes sense to align the startup with the company and the customers.
Yeah, one of the things that I was thinking when you were talking about the disadvantage of buying a high growth AI startup, you're paying a high price for that. And so you have to have a really tremendous growth thesis on how you're going to realize enough growth to make that high price worthwhile. It sounds like what you're saying, a similar growth thesis is required in order to make your corporate venturing program extremely successful. And what you're trying to do is pair that growth thesis with an early look at a startup. So you're buying them without a huge valuation, pairing that with a commercial thesis about how to grow it really fast once it's under your umbrella. So you're kind of getting your cake and eating it too.
Yeah, that's right. And that thesis is really important, and it really is the start of risk mitigation. And ultimately, corporate venturing program is a risk mitigation program because the biggest risk today, of course, is disruption. That an AI startup comes into your market and just takes your revenue, your profit, and your market share. And just to review, disruption means that the new entrant initially gets the job done worse. So it starts out not being as good as the incumbents. This is exactly like digital images, right? The first, the flip camera was definitely not as good quality as a 35 millimeter camera. Searching the internet was not as good and definitive as Britannica, right? Streaming was initially terrible, right? You couldn't even stream audio, let alone video. So everything starts out worse, and then immediately, at really high speed, starts to take over and get better and better, and then it becomes better for the customer. That is disruption, and it's just foundational combination of innovation theory with jobs to be done.
Right.
So that's the biggest risk. The risk is that companies are standing still. Now, let's say you took the exact same market thesis. You said, okay, here's the customer's job. Here's a segment. Here's an ICP. Here are the unmet needs. And we can build the product.
Mm-hmm.
The issue with doing it internal to teams is that they have people and processes and technologies set up to do a totally different thing. So now you're in the world of change management. You have to change the way that people think. You have to change the meetings they have. You have to change the processes they use. You have to change their vision of what they're going to build. And that is incredibly hard to do. And so if you've got a startup that is essentially has new DNA, it has no legacy constraints or baggage, it is going to go 10 times faster than an internal team that still also is responsible for renting video at Blockbuster, for selling film, because especially for public companies where they're still under corporate pressure, they're basically in a trap because their investors want them to continue to grow revenue and profitability while investing in the new thing, while trying to do all this change management. And that is just incredibly hard. And so there's also a financial and accounting benefit to this, is you're taking capital and putting it into these startups, and it's not directly hitting your revenue and profitability, but it's giving you all the things you need to then capitalize on growth opportunities with AI, while also mitigating the risk that you get massively disrupted by, Facebook is way bigger than Kodak, right?
Right.
Kodak went bankrupt.
And the difficulty of disrupting yourself has been written about extensively by Clay Christensen in The Innovator's Dilemma and The Innovator's Solution. And I think it's easy as an executive to read that and say, well, I just talked to the executives of my current product solutions, what's on the truck today, and they all intellectually understand the ways in which our current product is deficient in comparison to the new technology. They could certainly adapt. I talked to them and they told me that the new product is not good enough, and they told me what the roadmap would be for the new product. And what Clay points out is that it's not that the people running the existing company are intellectually dull. It's that the incentive structures are not appropriate. It's how do they make money? Even if you take an incumbent product that's doing $1 billion in revenue a year, it might only have a growth rate of 1%, which is a very small growth rate, but it's making a lot of money on that 1%. And the commissions, the bonuses, everything is so much stronger on growing that billion, even a tiny amount. Whereas if you start something from zero and you get it to 1 million, there's only so much cash to disperse out of that. And so an executive isn't going to be that excited about that $1 million in revenue. And so you have to overcome those incentive structures. And if you have a team that's only focused on that new product and the only revenue they can pull from is the revenue they generate, they are at existential risk every single day. And they're just going to push on generating new revenue in a different way. So it's not that your current executives don't understand the situation. It's just that creating that correct incentive structure within the environment of the large revenues they generate today out of their existing product causes a dilemma for them that's almost impossible for them to get out of.
Yeah, and you really, it's a great point. And even if they said, okay, we're going to build the new thing, there's an emotional part about this, is you can't just build a new thing. You have to be a fierce competitor who is going to destroy your existing product, not just like complement it. A lot of companies are adding AI to their existing products. Over time, that may work in the short term. Over time, a company that is free from all the legacy people, processes, and technology, the tech stacks. You need a different kind of tech stack to do this as well. Mm-hmm. When you're freed from that, that is going to be, Facebook to Kodak, Netflix to Blockbuster. That is where the growth is going to come. Because, and how do we know this? Well, you can just look at the underlying customer job. And you can say, I'm going to get this job done much better. No one wants to drive to a Blockbuster and rent a videotape. They just want to get home from work, sit down on the couch and push play and watch a new movie. it's faster and more accurate. That is the whole history of innovation is based on that. And the emotional part about it is people like their products. They're babies. They spend a lot of time. There's a lot of effort and investment, and even they like the code. It seems elegant. They wrote it. That's another thing. Obviously, people are not writing code anymore. AI agents are writing code. So you can't. It's understandable. You fall in love with the thing that you spend all this time on. There's a real emotional element of it. So who has done this well internally? Very, very few companies. Of course, Apple is, famously the company that disrupted itself. And how did they do it? They essentially created a corporate venturing unit. Now, they didn't do it by making equity investments in startups, but they knew Steve Jobs, because of his experience, literally almost by accident. Remember, he obviously very, very successfully launched the Apple II Plus, but then the Lisa was a huge failure. So they needed to start over. So he famously set up the pirate flag for the Mac group that was just completely isolated from the Apple II Plus. And obviously that was, hugely successful. And so when they did it again, he realized, okay, this people processes and technology and the old product is just going to slow us down. And so we're going to create an iPhone group, and the iPod group is not even going to know that it exists. It was that, your badge couldn't swipe you in to go just check out and hang out with the iPhone group and say, hey, what are you guys working on? Because he didn't want that cultural contamination between the two different groups, which were building an entirely different product. And the iPhone was going to destroy the iPod, which it did, which was incredibly hard to imagine. I mean, ask any corporate CEO today. We're going to take your most profitable product that is 50% of your revenue, and we're going to bring it to zero. They would freak out. Rightfully so. And shareholders would freak out, rightfully so, because it seems so hard to envision that the market for the new product is actually bigger than the market for the existing product, right? It was hard to imagine that Apple was going to sell more iPhones and be more profitable than they were with the iPod. They absolutely dominated the iPod market. That was just an enormous profit generator. So to do that is incredibly emotionally hard.
Right. And one of the benefits of isolating the team that's building the new thing is the team that's trying to sell and grow the old thing doesn't think twice about doing that. They're committed to it. They still want to grow 20, 40, 60% year over year. The iPod continued to grow even once the iPhone was launched. The iPod continued to grow for a little bit until the consumers realized what they could do with the iPhone, and then the growth trajectories rapidly switched. But you don't want to distract that team selling the existing thing by saying, oh, there's this much cooler, sexier thing happening over in the other room over there. You might want to be a part of it. Then they get distracted. They take their eye off the ball, and suddenly your growth of the existing product tanks, and you run out of fuel for everything you're trying to do. So this isolation becomes critical. And to bring it back to corporate venturing, a startup that you invest in outside of the company is going to be incredibly isolated. And it's unlikely your existing executives who are trying to sell the existing product and grow that are going to be threatened by a startup with, a handful of people trying to get a product off the ground the first time that they may not even know about because it's just invested in by the corporate venture arm.
Yeah, totally. And it's going to be interesting to see how companies respond to more and more pressure from the equity analysts. And what I mean by this is your example of the iPod. The iPod's growth rate started to slow right around 2006. And, we have charts of this. We tracked, the quarterly growth rate. And it just descended. And then there was a little bump, actually. It descended, and then it got a little bump. So it looked like maybe, hey, here's the turnaround, right? But what was happening was people just realized, okay, we're no longer going to buy iPods. We are going to have a device that is going to have our iPod on it. And remember, when the iPhone launched, the app was called iPod. It wasn't called Apple Music. It was literally called iPod. Apple wanted people to recognize this was the future. So imagine you're a CEO of a public company, and that's happening to your product today, or actually even in what's happening today is companies' profits are going up, but they're telling an AI story and their stock is going down. And that's because the pressure from the equity analysts is how do they respond to the foundation models and the enormous amounts of capital that is being invested in AI startups. And if they don't have a good story, even if their profits are currently going up, what the equity analysts realize is that's just a momentary state in time where what's going to happen is the AI products are going to disrupt their products. SaaS applications specifically are in serious trouble because, and again, this is why jobs theory is so useful and helpful to try and navigate this. Because what does AI mean? It's like, it's crazy new technology. We all know its power and how much better it's getting every day. But what does it really mean for customers and products? And a SaaS application is, famously known as CRUD, meaning what a user has to do is create, read, update, and delete information in the application. That's all going away. That is going away because what AI is going to do is get the job done for the customer. And we know this. This is basic innovation theory today.
Yeah.
It's how do you execute on that? And that's where companies can get into real trouble because of their legacy products and profitability. Ironically.
I think it's fascinating that you're pointing out that there are companies in public markets today with decent growth rates, throwing off a lot of cash in EBITDA, but their stock is descending in price because the street does not believe their AI growth story. And so they need to do something to have that. And the problem is, how do they do that without totally killing the growth rate and the current revenue streams they have by shifting their entire company to focus on something different that may or may not be proven in their market? So I think corporate venturing is a great opportunity for that. But that brings us back to the growth thesis. You have to have a really strong growth thesis. So what are the components of a growth thesis that can work for developing the new product and be a great story for the street?
Yeah, that's great. And importantly, if you're doing corporate venturing in the traditional pre-AI corporate venturing, that may or may not work. So, of course, in line with job suit on theory, if you're going to do corporate venturing in the age of AI, you need to innovate corporate venturing. So what does that mean? Well, what does traditional corporate venturing look like? You're basically a second-class venture firm. You're going to see deals later. You're going to see deals at higher valuations. You're not going to have the deal flow and speed of an independent venture firm. I live in San Francisco, right in the heart of the AI revolution. There are firms that are just all they do is look to source deals and network deals, and they can make decisions in hours, like not even days anymore. They can give you a term sheet in hours. I know it seems like a frenzy and it seems like a bubble, but that's the wrong way to look at it. They can deploy capital and opportunities at much faster rate into companies that can grow at a much faster rate because of AI. So that puts corporate venturing, traditional corporate venturing, at a huge disadvantage. So what does that mean? That means you have to innovate corporate venturing. And to your question, Jared, we need to figure out, okay, first and foremost, what are the markets? So how do you build a corporate venturing investment thesis and program that would enable you to have high confidence to invest in startups that you can, in partnership or however you want to do it, create the startups that you're investing in based on the investment thesis. And that means you need to understand the market first and foremost. What is the customer's job? Getting that wrong is just, lethal.
And what are the attractive markets? So which jobs should you be investing in that you can count on being stable over the long term and even growing as a market?
Yeah, and that's where actually not just the traditional market definition, but the traditional innovation investment thesis can actually create more risk, because you really have to redefine all the variables based on the customer's job. So what does that mean? That means, who is the customer first and foremost? And in our vernacular, you've got to look at the job beneficiaries, and this is more important than ever before, because a lot of SaaS applications are used by what we refer to as job executors. So that's going away. And the transition from on-premise to SaaS is a great example of this, because what happened going from on-premise to SaaS? Well, on-premise software was sold in part to IT managers, because they're the ones who are going to use it. They help set it up, et cetera. So in the world of SaaS, you don't need an IT manager. The actual job beneficiary, the Salesforce person using Salesforce, for example, can just log in and use it. You don't need an IT manager at all. That went away, and that's going to be accelerated by AI. So first and foremost, define who the customer and what their job is. That defines the market.
Yeah, I think there's another great present day example, which is, if you looked at Cursor, you'd say, well, the AI assisted developer IDE market is growing, the integrated developer environment, because that's the product, right? It's an IDE with AI agents in it. And so you start trying to invest in the next agent driven IDE to win. But that you're going to miss some big opportunities if you do that, because that's going to change. That interface and the specific needs that it satisfies for developers is going to change as AI gets better and better. And if you're stuck in the IDE, you might miss the opportunity to build products for end users, which is ultimately what the IDE helps people do. So this is true even if you're trying to invest in this moment of time where you see the growth happening. You're going to be late to the party if you just invest in products, given how fast the products are changing and how quickly companies can expand products to satisfy more needs and jobs.
Yeah, that's so true. And then in order to do that more efficiently with less risk, the first step is actually to then analyze the customer's job, figure out what all the needs are, which one of those needs are unmet, which is there a segment within that market that struggles more than the broad market, and what are they willing to pay to get the job done? What are the costs of getting the job done? What is the go-to-market and the business model, which also might be very, very different than what the incumbent company is doing. Right. Obviously, if you look at Blockbuster, the business model is rent a videotape.
Right.
And everything moved to subscription services. It's like a, classic kind of fundamental business model change. So you need to think through all of that, including like, what is the competitive advantage? Who are the competitors competing, not just one-to-one with your product, which are product substitutions, but who are the competitors that are actually helping to get the jobs done? And as we've talked about a lot, customer jobs are incredibly complex. So you can have competitors who you don't even know are competitors in the market today, because they're getting a job step done that you don't target. So a kind of just easy example is in getting to a destination on time. Address lookup, you do it with a paper map, and then parking was a totally different part of the job.
Right.
Right. It seemed like a different industry. You had the maps industry and the parking industry. But of course, then when you have navigation apps, you've got everything in a single app. So anybody else who is satisfying needs within a job step that you're not currently satisfying is also a potential competitive threat. So you need to do all of this work first, and then that can give you advantage to say, we want to be in this market with this investment thesis. And that's where then as a corporate venture program, you can say, okay, great, this is how we're going to start this company, and run tests and experiments much faster. That is also a just fundamental difference today. You can run these tests and experiments much faster.
Yeah, it's interesting. You just said as a corporate venturing arm, that's how we can start a company. So let's dig into that a little bit, because we've established that corporate venturing done in a new way could be a successful way to mitigate the challenges of trying to disrupt yourself within a company. So it could be it's a good addition to investing in R&D. We've also established that to do it effectively, you need a growth thesis, so that you choose the right markets to invest in, and you can identify the assets that are going to grow over time. The third bit that we've discussed is you got to get to the deal early so you don't pay a super high valuation after everybody else knows about it. And I think this is what you're addressing when you say the corporate venture arm could start a company. So can you unpack that a little bit? Like what would it look like to get an early look? How would you make that happen as a corporate venture fund?
Yeah, it's a great question. And again, remember what we want to do is, if you're running a corporate venture program, is to innovate corporate venture, right? So in the traditional corporate venture, you would network into people you know and deals you're seeing and trying to get into the deal flow. And then a deal comes up and there's a company and it says, we're raising capital. We're raising a series ABC, whatever it is. And we've got investors. Do you want to be in the round? And corporate venturing isn't really leading the rounds. They're participating in, venture rounds, with some exceptions, obviously. But if you were to innovate corporate venture under this type of thesis, then you would say, okay, we want to be the first capital into the new co, into the startup. So the startup gets started and it's got its first product. And then you're basing that investment on the investment thesis. So even before looking at the product, just, is this the right market? Is this something that the company wants to be in? So just take a company that's in, a B2B market. Obviously, it's not going to go after healthcare, right?
Right.
Maybe if there's like a strategic decision by the CEO and the board, like we should be in healthcare too. Okay, they could make that decision, but generally, you'd want the customer's job and the market thesis to be related to the markets that the company's already in. So, Blockbuster would stay in media. Kodak would stay in images. The difference, though, of course, is you're redefining the job, right? You're not looking at the market for videotape rental. You're looking for the market for, entertainment.
Right.
And
when Netflix switched from shipping DVDs to streaming movies, they didn't switch the job they were serving for customers. They just switched the solution they used to get it done.
Yeah, that's right. And then, and the Kodak example, which I love too, is even imaging. Whether it's analog film or digital images, the job is to share memories. So what Kodak missed, and this is again why corporate venturing can be so effective, what Kodak missed is that the market for sharing memories was thousands of times bigger than the market for selling film. You just had to think about it differently. And you had to think about the job differently. And then you had to recognize that the cost of your current product was going to effectively go to zero. Now we can all take tens of thousands of photos and videos a day at effectively zero costs. But people still want to get the job done with sharing memories. And that's what social networks, enable, obviously, in part. So if you have that thesis, which is like super important, then you're making those early investments as risk mitigation investments. It's much, much lower risk than to build the first versions of the products, try and get to MVP and prove out that you're creating value for customers. Product market fit, obviously, is you're getting the job done better for customers. And then you've also got the go-to-market and the business model that can scale. And that's the power of AI.
And what's interesting now is part of the power of AI is rapidly decreasing the cost and tremendously decreasing the cost of actually building the products. So it's almost, if you have a great investment thesis that you have confidence in and great evidence is going to be a growth opportunity, then you can invest in the entity. You can put capital into an entity that's going after that thesis, and they might build a dozen different looking products that try to serve that job really well. But because it's so inexpensive to build those and test them, that entity can try multiple things until it lands on the winning solution for that market.
Yeah, and that's also an important point, which is it's not just that it's lower costs to build a product. It's that the entire way you build a product with AI is completely different. And this goes back to the disadvantages of incumbent people, processes, and teams is they have a way of building products, and obviously that's been successful. Blockbuster was very successful. Kodak was a very successful company. I mean, it's hard to imagine, right? These companies were so big and dominant. This is the advantage of being old in the age of AI. Like, I remember history, and it seemed impossible that they could get disrupted and go and cease to exist. Yeah. So there are companies today that are worth 10, 50, 100, 200 billion that I guarantee will not exist. Will go to zero. Their products will go to zero. Just like the iPod went to zero, Kodak went to zero, Blockbuster went to zero. It's a cycle all over again. The customer's job doesn't go away, but their product certainly does.
Right.
So that's, and again, you're right. It's not that the people at the incumbent companies aren't smart and don't understand the theory. Kodak actually, one of my favorite examples, Kodak had the largest collection of digital imaging patents in the world.
Yeah.
And yet they couldn't execute on it because, one, they didn't understand that the market was the customer's job. So fundamentally, even if they were trying to sell digital imaging products, they were going to try and charge for a digital image, which is a business model problem. Because
I read recently in the book called Loon Shots, which is great read. Check it out. That Edwin Land, the founder of Polaroid, tried to convince the military to use digital imaging decades before Sony productized a digital camera, but wouldn't have Polaroid invest in it because they were like, we make all our money on film. How are we going to make money on this thing that isn't renewable? We can't just make money selling cameras. That's not going to work. That's not nearly as good of a business as selling film and developing film. So he dismissed it for his own company, even though he thought it was super valuable for the military.
Yeah. Yeah. So fascinating. And, I do think this is where companies can be led astray by incumbent products, but also business models. It's the famous, you want to sell, give away the razor and sell the razor blades, right? That is not the way to think about AI. Right? It's just a fundamentally different technology that is going to enable different business models where there isn't the equivalent of the blades, right? Now, what there is continuously getting the job done for the customers. So you have to think through what that means, and importantly, what are customers willing to pay for? Because that's what really, really changes too. And this is the advantage of sizing markets based on the customer's job. Again, because the job is the North Star. It's stable. It never changes, through all of the technology changes from the PC to the internet to AI. Customers' jobs are exactly the same. This is really, all the way back to Theodore Levitt and his famous paper, Marketing Myopia. If anybody's interested in the history of jobs theory, he was looking at why the railroad industry and the oil industry and the movie industry all missed opportunities for cars, natural gas, solar, and TV. It's because they defined themselves by their products. They thought the products were the market, and that is so. All the way back to railroads. This is the same fundamental concept that is true today, and this is what's really helpful in corporate venturing. Yeah. Because if you're going to innovate corporate venturing, start with the customer's job. It's going to be really hard to figure out which technology to use. Like what is the technology implications? How do we use the technology for what? And this is where the job really, really helps in figuring out the investment thesis.
Yeah. So to wrap up, how would you beat corporate venturing? We've established that corporate venturing could be more important than ever for large public companies. And to do it better than in the past, you can create this jobs to be done based investment thesis to know you have a great market to go after, then allocate capital to a new entity that can go after AI solutions until it hits so that you can monitor their trajectory and get an early look at the deal and be the first capital in. And that's a different way to do corporate venturing that could beat the traditional model.
Yeah, that's great. And if you think about it, so how do you innovate corporate venturing? Well, first and foremost is create a different innovation process, right? De-risk what you're going to invest in and how they're going to innovate. And that's really the foundational jobs to be done, investment thesis. Then the second is innovate deal sourcing. Rather than being a second-class citizen in the VC world, start the companies and make the investments in the early stages so that you can see and track the progress at the earliest stages based on a different innovation method.
Yeah.
And then thirdly, and importantly, is the speed of the decision making. You cannot, in the age of AI, at the speed which things are changing, have a really bureaucratic, legal, procurement, decision structure that is going to slow down the decision. And not everything's going to be perfect. Of course, venture investing is risky, but you have to have that decision, the innovation, the deal sourcing, and the decision-making structure in order to build a portfolio. And that's also the other part of the risk, is you're building a portfolio in the markets that you already, before you even make the investment decisions, know these are the markets you want to be in because they relate to what the company and the company's customers do today. And that gives you a much higher likelihood of, first and foremost, preventing the disruption that's going to have you end up like, Kodak or Blockbuster or Botanica or BlackBerry or whoever, and give you the look that you want into where growth opportunities are and the opportunity to obviously acquire the portfolio companies in the corporate venture portfolio.
That's right, because done right, you're not just replacing the revenue that you're losing from your existing products. You're creating far more equity value. If you look at Facebook replacing Kodak, Facebook is worth a lot more than Kodak ever was. And there are many examples where the disruptor becomes worth much more than the incumbent ever was.
Yeah, and if you apply Jobs theory to that equity value creation, why did Apple's iPhone create more equity value? It got more jobs done. Why did Netflix streaming service create more equity value than Blockbuster? Because it was a faster, more accurate experience that enabled them to get way more customers at much more scalable model. Same thing with Kodak. Why is Facebook worth? I think it may be worth now 100 times what Kodak was worth. So Kodak was worth $30 billion. I think Facebook is now in the trillions. Obviously, I've checked its market cap recently, but that's because the market is truly the job and much bigger opportunity when you get the whole job done for customers.
And they start to get more jobs done on top of it, which adds to the equity value.
Yeah. So really enormous opportunity for corporate venturing today. I'd say more opportunity for corporate venturing today than ever before, but also more important to do corporate venturing given the age of AI that we live in.
Yeah. And if you want to talk about this, reach out. There's a lot of great ideas here.
Thanks for listening. Remember to subscribe and like to this podcast. And if you want to learn more about Jobs to be Done innovation methods, visit us at thrive.com, thrv.com.